Today's guest is Peter Panagore, Mdiv. I met Peter Panagore, a two-time near-death experiencer at the IANDS, International Association for Near-Death Studies Conference. Peter Panagore, Mdiv, is an internationally acclaimed author and spiritual counselor. Best known for his Audible International Best-Seller, Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. Panagore has had two near-death experiences that profoundly altered his life. And that is what we'll be discussing today. After earning his BA in English Literature from the University of Massachusetts in 1982, he shifted his focus from architecture to theology, completing his Master of Divinity at Yale University with a concentration in the Classics of Western Mysticism. Panagore served progressive New England churches and their communities for over 2 decades, all the while continuing his private mystical studies and contemplative practices. In his 15-year tenure as a television writer, he authored 1,700 stories of hope and inspiration for his daily NBC TV morning news broadcast across Maine and New Hampshire, reaching an audience of 30 million viewers annually. Panagore currently hosts Not Church, Mysticism, No Doctrine, No Dogma, No Bravo Sierra on his YouTube channel, provides spiritual counseling via Zoom, and teaches meditation and yoga to an international community. He resides in a quaint coastal town in Maine, and he is going to be sharing some fascinating and transformative stories about when he died and came back twice. So now, get ready to hear my conversation with Peter Panagore. Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@WTFJustHappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. Welcome to What the Fuck Just Happened? I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listened to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey-skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I'll be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird shit. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the fuck just happened? Hi, so today I am speaking with Peter Panagore. He is a near-death experiencer, and we met at the IANDS conference last end of August, early September of 2023.
and IANDS is the International Association of Near-Death Studies. So welcome, Peter. Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me, Liz. Appreciate it. I am a two-time near-death experiencer. I died when I was 20 in 1980 of hypothermia exposure, and then again in 2015 of a heart attack, congenital family sort of thing. Uh, in both instances, my life has turned around and changed. It's a kind of thing that not only happens in the moment and the time that it happens, it continues on through time, through my life on a daily basis. It has a residual, like a wave that follows me.
If you're comfortable going into it, do you mind telling us first about your first NDE and then your second?
I will, briefly, because the first one is very lengthy. I was there for a long time and lots of things happened. I was ice climbing in Alberta, Canada. I'd been a mountaineering kind of guy, all seasons camper, mountaineer, backpacker, National Ski Patrol, all around outdoor winter guy. And we had just completed this fella named Tim, who was from the outing club at the Montana State University, had this trip planned to do a 10-day expedition into British Columbia, snow caving into British Columbia to Mount Assiniboine, and then a one-day ice climb. I'd never ice climbed before, but I'd done a fair amount of rock, and I had a reputation as a mountain goat, and I was good with rope. So I begged up and borrowed and rented all the gear that I needed and came up short. I only had one hammer and one axe, and I should have had two axes. I could climb with a hammer, and I did, but the climbing with a hammer made me go significantly slower, maybe half the speed of everybody else. I had to keep gripping onto this thing, and with the axe, you could set it in the ice and suspend yourself. And the axe had a longer swing to it, so every ascent, every motion of ascent that I made was a foot shorter than everybody else. There was a bunch of other people on the climb that day. We were the last team ascending on that day. So my climb was so slow and successful, but so slow. By the time we reached the top of the climb, 500 feet up, the sun was setting and the temperature dropped about 30 degrees, and hypothermia set in immediately because we were dressed for the day, and it's a sweaty sport because there's ice falling down your neck and that sort of stuff, and you sweat. So the temperature dropped and hypothermia started. I developed immediately these violent shivers where every muscle in my body twitched on its own independently of every other muscle. So I was just this sort of shaking fella, including my jaw and my tongue. Everything in me was shaking. So I could tell you the whole trauma night event. It was a all-night decision to keep walking forward because we knew we were going to die. We felt we were at the top of this cliff. We were like, this is going to kill us, and there's nobody here to save us. So we decided to make our descent in the dark the best we could. It was harrowing, traumatic, frightening. It took a lot of mental stamina to maintain our emotional cool so that we wouldn't freak, and because panic in the wilderness will kill you. And we were already in desperate situation. As the night went on, the temperature continued to drop and hypothermia continued to advance. We ended up with frostbite all over my body. I still wear, I live in Maine. I'm wearing a hat inside, and I got half gloves on to keep my hands warm. A lot of things happened through the night. We lost some of our ability to reason. We felt like our bodies were consuming themselves because we were out of energy because we didn't have any food, and our body was trying to keep itself warm, and we were trying to move forward, and it was getting colder and darker, colder all night long, and that sapped our energy. So we were pushing. The more we pushed ourselves, the closer we came to death, because the closer we used up our energy and time, but also the closer we came to the bottom. So there was this balance between driving ourselves forward against death and knowing that as we drove ourselves forward, we increased the possibility of our death. And it was a real, I say it now without tears, and I say it now without the trauma showing through, but there was a long time in my life until recently that it would just be a dark place for me to talk about. So we made it to the final rappel, and it's sometime before morning, before sunup. And I should set the scene here. So we're along the Saskatchewan River on the Icefields Parkway, and across the river is a mountain range. And we're on a mountain called Cirrus Mountain, Lower Weeping Wall, which is maybe 100 yards from the parkway. And there's a parking lot across the street, but we're in the middle of nowhere. This is March. It's Western Canada. We're north of Banff and south of Jasper, and they're hours and hours away, and there's nobody living here. This is a provincial park, so we are by ourselves. The beauty was overwhelming. The night sky was filled with the most stars I've ever seen in my life. Even when the moon came out with this three-quarter moon, there's still more stars in the sky with that three-quarter moon than there ever was wherever I had lived. So this is absolutely beautiful, but we're also terrified and keeping our cool. And now we were standing on this ledge that was about the size of a boardroom table, and there are holes drilled into the granite with iron pins and rings, and the pins are epoxied in, and the rings have carabiners attached, and there are straps. And so we're hooked into the mountain. For the first time, we're not going to fall. Every motion we made through the night, and we were on crampons, these spiky things that are the spikes are about an inch and a half long, and and your foot doesn't bend. You can't bend your foot with this. It's clomp the whole way. So we were in danger of falling all night long, and so now we're safe from falling. Tim was to my left, and I had the rope. I was the last one to descend. I took the rope and I tied one end to my harness, and I took the other end and I tossed it out around this corner. There was a corner on the mountain, and we had descended down this dark crag of granite. We were off the ice, and way at the top of this crag was this iron pin epoxied in with a ring through which we had put the rope. So it's supposed to be this easy pull down. And so I tossed the rope out around the corner and I gave it a pull, and I didn't pull it 6 inches, and it jammed in some kind of wedge. There was some kind of rock wedge. I couldn't see it. And so I pulled it again, and it jammed in tighter, and I pulled it again, and that last little centimeter made it impossible to pull out. And I tried to flip the line, but I couldn't get the flip of the line, that sine curve you create when you flip a hose. I couldn't get it to go around the corner because the rope was lying on the mountain. So now we can't ascend and we can't descend. And we can't ascend because we're dying. Now we're dying. We're actively dying. I can't feel my hands. I can't feel my feet. My feet had gone from standing on red hot coals, is what it felt like, to not feeling anything. And my hands were in the same situation. And I'm bitten all over my nose and my cheeks and my ears, and everything is bitten on me with the frost. And I had this recognition. A recognition came over me where I understood that I was going to die no matter what I did. And so, cutting a long story short, I had the very end stage of hypothermia, which was this tunnel vision. And this tunnel vision collapsed on me and closed my vision. And as it collapsed on me, I wondered if I was falling asleep. But then when it closed, I didn't. I awakened. And I was like a dark shade, and all of my pain had gone away. And I was confused because I had been falling asleep, and sleep had dropped like a curtain. And I would lose consciousness. I'd smack on the rock. I'd stand back up again. But this time I was not asleep, and the mountain had disappeared, and all of my pain was gone. And so in this confused state, I could see in front of me where there had been the mountain now was this darkness, and this darkness extended the size of the universe. And in the far distance of the universe, if you can imagine a night where you're out somewhere and the only star, and there's no light pollution, and there's the only star in the sky as you see is the North Star, that one single star. And then that it just appeared like that, and it rushed toward me across this very vast distance. And as it came toward me, this light, I wondered what was going on, and it communicated to me telepathically, non-linguistically, with a packet of information that was not structured in language, that arrived all at once, and it told me, I'm taking you. And I thought to myself, I don't know what's going on, but I don't plan on going anywhere because I'm a little confused right now. And so I put up my will of resistance against this, and it filled my vision as it came toward me. This huge whiteness surrounded me and then just plucked me out of myself, just took this dark shade of me and enfolded me. And when I was enfolded in it, it was gigantic. And we started to move immediately. And I felt this severing from my body. There was no longer, people talk about the silver cord. Well, in my youth, I'd had different kinds of mystical experiences where this same angel, this same intelligence had come to collect me. But this time I was cut from my body, and I became a body of light. I still had and this is all metaphor. Okay. This is an image that I'm trying to paint to communicate that which I can't say. So I'm in the shape of a human being, and I am made of light. I am a light being encased inside this cloud-like entity of intelligence who's communicating to me the whole time. Massive intelligence, incredible compassion, overwhelming comfort. All of my hesitancy of leaving was gone. I was where I needed to be and doing what I wanted to do, even though I had no control. And we were rushing back up in the direction that it had come for me. And as we rushed up, I could see through it into this velvet darkness because it was transparent. And I could see nothing at all, except I was, well, I should put it this way. This intelligent entity was superpositioned. And it was also the divine, the fullness of the infinite divine itself in a reduced form for me, speaking for the divine in its own voice. It was both of these things at the same time, but in this reduced form for me. And I was superpositioned. So I was inside the angelic being carried back up to the divine, but I was also outside. And although I couldn't, from the inside of this being, see my outside self, I could see my inside self, my light body and the angelic being, as if I had a non-local eye, as if I was seeing this happen from the point of view of God. And I could see myself being carried. But when I looked from inside, I couldn't. And so I came up to this, I was carried up to this edge that then the angelic being unfolded itself and became this much larger space. And I popped out of this angelic being and my form changed. I was no longer shaped like a human being. I was an orb of consciousness, of energy, where all of my senses and my self-awareness and my thinking were one thing. They were not separate. And I was no thing. I was no thing. And I was in a space of no thingness. There was nothing there, including me, that had any relationship that I can say to this physical world. Even if we get into quantum, it is not here, and there's no thing. And so I am this intelligent and intellectual, understanding, self-knowledged being who I recognized myself as, this is my original self. This is who I've always been. How did I forget who I was when I was a human? And I could see in every direction. And as I was like 10,000 eyes, and I could see, I was like in a huge womb. Like in this womb, this oceanic womb was darkness and illumination simultaneously, because there was a deep, darker darkness at the far distant, I don't know, a septillion light years away from me, edge that surrounded me like a big, huge egg. And beyond this edge was an infinite darkness, which I knew had depth, but could not penetrate with even this expanded consciousness that I had. It was too big. And I was alone, and I was content. and all of my suffering had gone, all of my pain had gone. I didn't remember any of it. And then the divine entity itself opened the darkness, and the darkness became light, and this light was pure white, like a waterfall flowing, and it was all of the star colors that I'd seen that night, and all of the electromagnetic wave spectrum, and a million, many, many million more, and they were all individual little tiny stars, little tiny lights of all these electromagnetic radiations and more, and they were simultaneously white light. They weren't flipping from one to the other. They were both at the same time. They were many and one. And this many and one was the most beautiful I'd ever seen. My heart wanted this beauty. And as I wanted this beauty with my heart, I moved toward it with thought, and it came toward me. And as I got close to it, I saw it had solidity, translucency, and transparency. And I could see all these layers at once, and I wanted it. And so I touched it with my being, and it opened me and infilled me and surrounded me and absorbed me. And in this state, it showed, and I'm in timelessness. Also, I need to say this, that I talk about this in a chronology, but this is all way outside of the norm here, where one thing happens after another. So I'm absorbed into this entity. I recognize immediately it is source, God, prime mover, supreme being, Atman, whatever name, which it has no name you want to label onto it, as long as it's ineffably and infinite. And it is all life. It is life giving to all things that are. And I experience the structure of the universe, of its life giving capacity for all things that exist. And I hear my soul name being called. I hear myself being called into being as my original self, eons and eons and eons ago. And in this, I see my original self, and I understand that I'd always been being breathed or called into being, and was at this moment in timelessness being called into being by Maker Creator, and that I was creature, not just as a human being, but in the essence of my original self. And as this entered into me and looked at me, I went to hell, purgatory, went to whatever kind of thing you want to call that, where I had my life review. And my just recent life review, involved me experiencing all of the interior lives of all of the people I had hurt in my life from their point of view, simultaneously experiencing all of my emotions and reasons for causing them that pain. And the pain that I had given to them turned out to be 1,000, 10,000 times greater than I had ever imagined. And that it became a weight on me. And I felt shame for having caused so much pain, but I wasn't judged. All of this light that I was surrounded with and interiored with was speaking love to me. I have known you in everything that you have done, known you as a human every day of your life, not just the days, but in the micro moments, the atom moments, these thousandths of a millionth of a billionth of a second. I am always there inside of you and everyone. And I know you from the inside out, and I love you as you are, even those shadow parts of you. And then all of my pain ended. I had this pain that I had given away, but it had all ended because all of the love that I'd been given in my life and all of the love that I'd given away had a substance to it. And this substance was a connection to the divine. And as I heard the voice of the divine with mercy and love, showing me my limited form and its unlimited nature, my impurity versus its purity, my creatureliness and its creatorness, I just turned toward it. As I released myself and accepted this love, I was expanded and blown up like a balloon, and I became large inside of this vast space. And the divine infilled me with this, with purity and beauty and love, knowledge, understanding, bliss, paradise, heaven, joy, adoration, awe, glory, whatever truth, all of these things that we divide here on earth and have, uh, they were all one there. And I was infilled to the point where I thought that I would be obliterated. And then I saw my original self. I saw myself as an image of a particle of the divine fullness of being, the same as, just separate from, the same as, superpositioned with this field of photons that was broader and wider and deeper than I can express. And I was one of those photons, but I was outside of the fullness of the oneness, but like superpositioned or cabled to it. And I was it and less than it. And I saw my next life level down, soul level down, and this next level soul down was myself that incarnates and in this long tale of my life as an entity. I had lived. I could see into all these different lives. I saw into two of them, but I had all these different lives that I had lived, and all of them were simultaneous to my experience. They weren't. They were sequential, but they were all happening at the same time from my point of view. And I entered into two of them. I saw some things, and it's all in the book. Then the divine reduced me back to a size where I could remember some of my just previous life. And meanwhile, it was speaking to me, love, come to me, come to me. And so now I say, am I dead? And the voice says, yes, you're dead. And I say, well, what about my parents? My sister had vanished, run away when I was a kid, and had hurt my family deeply. It's why I didn't go home this spring break back to Boston. I was avoiding, it was why I was in Montana in the first place. I was getting away from the pain. And I said, what about my parents? I'm going to lose another kid. And the voice swept me across this heaven and to the edge of, to an edge of it where our universe was, and poked a tiny bit of me out. And I could see the vast distances between galaxies. I could see, I don't know how many, a million galaxies and all this vast distance. And my vision was taken back to the origin of our universe. And as the divine, which was infinite darkness, was pouring out light, weaving it into matter that became all the structure of our entire universe, all of the galaxies, inside of which all this light, and it was bursting forth universe after universe after universe, one after the other, and ours was still ours, but there was others and others and others, and this infinite birthing from this darkness. All of it was love, and this love itself was again self-evident to me. The whole universe, our whole universe, that amount of love and much, much more that was pouring out into these other universes was aimed specifically at me. And as it's aimed at me, I know that I am the most beloved creature ever created in our universe. And I feel this was, is, and always will be blessed of light and welcomed of love, because not because of anything I had done, just because the divine is love itself, beyond all gender, beyond all religion, beyond all language. It is in of itself this being of love. And then it turned my vision to earth, and I could see all of earth like a hologram, and 7 billion people, and in every single heart that I could see was this golden fleck of the same love. And so there was this, I was the most important child of the divine, but paradoxically, so was everybody else. Everybody had this shared equality of particular belovedness that is paradoxical, because it's like you can only have one thing that's unique in a category. And I was unique in the category of being beloved, but everybody else had this uniqueness in the category of being beloved. And nobody on earth could see this. They were all blind to this inside themselves. And then I saw my parents' faces pop up. And I'm telling this story pretty fast because there's more to it. My parents' faces pop up, and I can see their life with me and their life without me. And one's worse than the other. And I know that timelessness is real. And the time is the length of my human life was a snap of the fingers. And I say, can I come back here if I go back to help my parents? And the voice says, it's your choice. You can come back here. You can stay here now. I say, well, then I choose to live my life. And it says, you won't live your life, and sends me out. And then it gives me a choice of all of these different lives that I could live inside the same body. And I make a choice, and I travel down this tunnel. And there are all these doors inside of this tunnel leading to all the other choices I could have made about this life. And I emerge at the end being carried by the same angelic form, and I'm put back into my body again. My brain comes on. I experience the confinement and exile of this human biology in which I am now encased. And I come to, and Tim is crying and screaming over my death. And I open my eyes, and he's surprised. And we self-rescue. The rope came free. And that's a short version of a long tale. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing. All my questions I'm glad I have notes. They all sort of went out of my head. I was very moved and a little lost in your story. You said you went to your original self. Did that mean before you had lived any life as a human at all?
Or any other creature. It wasn't, I hadn't, in my incarnations, I wasn't just a human being. And yes, to answer your question.
Were you animals on this planet as not just a human?
I was an animal, but I entered into, I got to see, from my point of view, I saw that I had all these lives and that none of them were me, that I was this like oversoul over them. And I was given permission to look into two of them, and I looked into two, and one was a human life and the other was some kind of animal, maybe a lizard on a branch, or some kind of lizard-like eye on another planet. I don't have any idea. I just know that I was pre-linguistic in that form. I didn't have any language. I was some kind of tiny creature.
And you said you saw all the hearts, almost every heart of all the 7, maybe 8 billion people on the planet were all connected to one source. Did that include animals as well?
I didn't see that, but in my life experience, I have seen that. I have a mystical experience subsequent to this as a result of my near-death experience. When I was at a monastery, saw the light inside of a bird that was on my finger go into the light inside of me, and my light became its light. And I know from having dogs, just having a dog, I know. And I've had all these encounters with all these animals all my life. I have, one of my after effects is I have an animal magnetism, I guess. All sorts of, I have hawks and chickadees and chipmunks and squirrels and seals and all sorts of stuff. They are as ensouled as you and me.
I believe that. And also, I asked if you saw all the hearts of animals. What about beings on other planets, similar to humans, or did you just see Earth?
I just saw Earth, but I understood that there was life beyond our Earth in all the universe. The divine was all life and all living things. And though I didn't see them, I sensed them. I should also add this. In 1977, several years before this, I chased a UFO with 4 guys in a car for many miles and watched it do things we can't do. And then just 2 summers ago, I saw one over 2 Mays ago, over my yard with a buddy. And we got a little video.
There's so much I want to ask you. I'm going to stick with the NDEs, and then if you don't mind getting into UFOs when we're done with talking about NDEs. I hope this isn't rude, but you said during your life review, you were experiencing all the hurt you caused people. Were you with an exception, like a person who was kind of in a bad place that was causing hurt more than a lot of people do? Or was it just the average, like all of us hurt people, all of us help people, we're just how most of us are, a mixture?
Yeah, just a run-of-the-mill, slightly vandalous childhood, hurting my sisters, hurting those who are dearest to me in only ways that siblings can, that sort of thing. It wasn't, but the measure of it was in comparison to purity of love. And so the measure of the wounds that I gave away were, I could, and I wasn't at fault for it. That's the other thing. The divine showed me all of humanity and showed me this radical equality of all of our brokenness, that every one of us is broken in the same way, like the whole universe is less than the divine. And because it is, we're in this situation where we hurt people and we get hurt by people. And it's not just humans. I mean, bears hurt other bears, and, salmons, I don't know about, that's not a good example, but, brown-headed cowbirds steal the eggs and eat the eggs of sparrows and replace them with their own eggs. It's like, the world is full of, what's that quote from Jack London? Or I can't remember who said it, but it's red in tooth and claw. And humanity's not an exception to that. But I wasn't at fault for being a human being. I wasn't guilty for doing what I did because I didn't make myself. All I had to do was accept this overwhelming waterfall, Niagara Falls of love pouring down on me. It was irresistible. It was self-evident and irresistible. And then once it happened, I was healed of everything. I was one with the divine. I was my beatific self. I was whole and healed.
You said you saw, again, yourself before you lived any material experience or material lives. Was that, do you know, time-wise, did that tie in with pre-Big Bang? Was it at the start of the Big Bang? Is that when how did that tie in, if it did?
I wasn't shown that. I wasn't shown that. And if I was, I don't remember. I came back with a small amount of information. But my sense is that I was eternal in nature because at the level of my original self, I'd always been. And there was this limitation to it too. And the limitation of it was that I was at one point made limited. And I don't really, when I look at when I can look back in my memory, which is a weird thing because I didn't have a brain at the time, but when I look back in my soul memory of this, I saw an origin point, but maybe that's when I was called into being for incarnational purposes. But my original self, I have to use the word predated, but that's not correct because there was no time predated that.
Thank you. I know we're going to talk more about time after. I know we were touching upon it at the start, so to our listeners, we will get into time and the nature of it. But would you mind sharing about your second NDE?
Sure. My first one left me without a fear of death, and that even though I kept my first NDE a secret most of my life at 20 years or so, I told my wife knew about it, and I would frequently say to her, "I'm just not afraid of dying. I'm just not afraid." And so one day, I was gonna go solo sailing. Someone had given me a sailboat, but the day I went down to the dock, and I live in a coastal town. went down to the dock, and there was such a thick fog I couldn't even see the boats in the morning. So I decided, I'm not doing that. So why that matters to the story is if the fog had not been there, then I would not be here, because I would have been out when I had my heart attack and I couldn't have sailed back in. So I would have died. So instead, I went to yoga class, and I'd been practicing yoga at this point for 30 years or something. And I went to this class, and I was late. And the teachers I live in a small town, and it's summertime, so it's also a resort town, so there's lots of summer people, and the studio's crowded, and I'm late, and so the class had actually already begun. And the teacher, who's a friend of mine, said, "Oh, you just set up in the doorway." So open the door, and I'm halfway in the ante room and a little bit in the classroom. And I begin my practice, and I suddenly get really, really, really hot. Like really, it's summertime, and my yoga practice produces a lot of prana, and it makes me physically hot. And I thought, geez, I'm wicked hot. And I just started to sweat profusely, and I was in downward dog. And I thought, oh, I got to lie down for a minute. I don't feel great. So I lay down on my mat in Shavasana, and I'm lying there, and I'm sweating and sweating and sweating. And I think, do a body inventory. So I look myself over, like, oh, my heart hurts. Oh, that's weird. Oh, that it kind of really hurts. And I thought, oh, all right. And so, but I had run 5K the day before. And so I get up and I go outside, and I left the class, and I lay down. First I sat down in an Adirondack chair, but that hurt too much. And so I lay down on the grass in the shade, and my pain got worse and worse. And I thought, and I had been on the ski patrol when I was in college, and when I lived on this island in down East Maine, I was on the ambulance crew, and so I was a certified ambulance attendant, and it's like, run through the risk. Oh my God, I'm having a heart attack, and I know that this is what killed my grandfather. It killed my sister, and it almost killed my dad, but they life flighted him and saved him back in the mid '80s, and this was 2015, and so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack. And then I had this flash of happiness. I'm like, oh my God, today's my day. Today I've been praying for my death every day for the entire time since I came back. I was like, get me out of here. And then I thought, well, I got 2 kids and a grandchild, and I should at least try to stay alive. So, but I was happy. And so I'll cut out all of the middle part of this story where I went to the urgent care center and I get loaded on the gurney. And it turns out I had a widowmaker heart attack, 100% blockage. 6% of people survived this. They gave me a 3% trickle through with some decoagulant. They offered me morphine, which I refused because it makes me sick, and shuttled me off in the ambulance. By the time I got in the ambulance to go to the catheterization lab, I was well outside my golden hour, which you get when you have this kind of coronary. And the doc had told my son, who had been there in his mid to late 20s, to say goodbye to me. And so he did. And my wife was there, and I smiled at her and winked at her. I was like, I'm out of here, honey. I've told you. So in the ambulance on the way down, I was meditating to control my pain because I couldn't take the morphine. And meditation to control your pain is a practice that I've been practicing since I was in high school. It's pretty easy, actually. It doesn't take a lot of training. And so I was meditating, aiming at my heart with my mind in order not to feel my pain. And we're in the ambulance, and sirens going, and you can still hear when you're meditating. You can hear everything going on. So I hear the paramedic say on the radio, "We're losing him." And I opened my eyes, and there she was. And I could see in her face that she was losing me, because her face was all in this contorted, not panic, but alarm. And as soon as she saw me look at her, she was totally professional and went right back to her game face. But the pain had rushed back so intensely when I brought my mind away from my heart that I had to go back in immediately into my meditation. And so I closed my eyes, and I went back to my meditation. Only I wasn't in my body anymore when I went back inside. I was outside of my body in the dark tunnel, or in the tunnel, And I knew that I was close to my body, and I knew that I was still in the ambulance, but I couldn't see the ambulance, couldn't see me, couldn't see the attendant. I was in a different dimension, and the angelic being came rushing toward me again down the same tunnel, and it was communicating to me in plural, we and us. Come to us. It's time for you to come to us. We've been waiting for you. And so there's like a collective of light, but it's one entity, and I think I'm out of here. And so it comes to side by me, and I begin now not being enfolded in it, but paralleling it while it's touching me. And I am in my light body, and I'm going with it. And then I thought to myself, well, I know what's going on this time. Hold on a second. This was rather sudden. I should take a look around inside my life and see if my wife and kids are ready. My granddaughter's ready. And so I turned before we went very far, and I went back inside this cave, and this dark cave, in this cave of myself, I could see my son's face, and I could empathetically read his entire emotional, psychological state when he said goodbye to me. And I could see that he wasn't ready. And then I could see my daughter, who had just left a tumultuous marriage to a war veteran who came back with moral injury, and their baby had just been born, and we had just, as a family, performed a rescue months before. And they weren't ready. And then I saw my granddaughter. She was, I don't know, 6 months old, 8 months old. I could see her life with me and without me. There was this parallel life thing that happened again. And I could see that she needed a father, grandfather in her life. And so I came back out of my cave, and the angel had retreated some distance and came rushing back to me, welcoming me and ready to enfold me. And I communicated with an understanding of timelessness again. If it's all the same to you, I'm going to stick around because they need me, because I know where I'm going. And without so much as asking permission, it was more like, there's the door, close it on the way out kind of thing. I just turned around and went back inside, and it let me. And then I went to the catheterization lab. They put a stent in me, and the next day, I told everybody what happened to me in my room. I had I knew a bunch of doctors and friends in Portland, and my family, and a bunch of people were there when in the morning when I woke up. And I told him my story, and my son said to me that the doctor had told him to say goodbye to me because I was going to die on the way, because 6%, and because outside the golden hour, and because there's nothing you can do. And so I told him the story. And in each event, and in other kinds of mystical events that have happened previous to all of this and subsequent to the first NDE, I change. I become a different person. And I still have the same characteristics. I still look the same. I still have, my whatever. I have ADHD, and that's still there, and I get allergies. Those are still there. But I become a different person. And I think that that's true for everyone who has a near-death experience, but also true for people who have other kinds of mystical experiences. That when the numinous touches you in a way that is spiritually transformative, you know it. And no one can convince you otherwise, because it's not a thing that happens in the head.
You said you also had other spiritual experiences. And NDEs are often referred to as realer than real.
Oh, yeah.
I'm assuming that these NDEs felt realer than real.
Yep. Makes this place feel faker than fake.
I think that for me, that feels, as someone who came to this research through grief, that makes me really, really happy to hear. And hopefully, most of our listeners who are here because of grief feel that too. And if you don't mind sharing maybe one of your spiritual experiences that you had before, but I also want to ask, did those feel realer than real? What were the differences between the spiritually transformative experiences and the NDEs?
I think the biggest difference is detachment from my body, the severing of the connection. And in my second NDE, my body was still there, but I wasn't attached to it. And when I went back in to look around, I was like an anthropologist looking at a population group. Um, I mean, I could feel them, but I also knew that in the end they were all going to be okay anyway, because everything is. So it wasn't. I, so I'll leave that. I'll leave that there at that. The way I said that, the biggest difference is that I always had a way back before. There was always this connectivity, and so when I was a child, before I before I had my NDE, I'm going to count them up: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 before my NDE, and all of them involved me being taken out of my body by this same angelic being rather abruptly. And the first time it happened, I was 5 years old. I was in the morning kindergarten class, and so I was home for the afternoon. My brand new baby brother was sleeping in the house, so I was banished from the inside on this September day. And I was waiting for my sisters to come home from Catholic school off the bus. And so I climbed up a tree, first or second branch up, not very high. And my plan was to jump down and scare them because they were my older sisters. And so I was hiding in this tree and waiting for the bus. And as I was waiting, all of the leaves, which were this maple, it's a sugar maple tree. And so there were dark and light sides to the leaves. And the breeze was blowing. And so all these leaves were flipping back and forth in front of my face because I was surrounded with them. And I had this mesmerization happen. I got relaxed. I was watching this. It was like being hypnotized, and they were so beautiful, and I sort of lost track of myself. And then suddenly there was this loud roar behind me, and this roar was a waterfall in volume, which I had never heard before because I'd never seen a waterfall because I was a kid. But it was this tremendous amount of like jet engine sound, which I'd heard because jets had flown over. So there was this huge noise behind me, and then that same noise came into me. And when it came into me, I became aware of its majesty, its power, its superior everything. And it took me and raced me up this tunnel. And I went flying with this entity inside of it up this tunnel, and I could see myself below me in the tree. And then I could see the house, and I could see the yard, and I could see the county and the state, and then the edge of the curvature of the world. And I looked up, and where I should have seen stars, there was a darkness, and we went through into this darkness. And in this darkness, this angelic being was a sphere, a big, huge bubble, and I was in it in this transparency. And I could see myself, and I had a shape of a human, but I was in my light body. I was made of light again, first time. And I'm made of light, and I can see down this tunnel. I can see the boy in the tree. And I was like, oh, there's the boy in the tree. That's really not me. This is me. And so I'm in this bubble, and then this bubble, and in this bubble is in this vast darkness. And the bubble opens, and the darkness draws me out. I get sucked out like a straw, and I'm popped right out into the darkness. And I'm floating in the darkness, and I can see this sphere. And in this darkness, I experience this infinity, this compassion, this structure, this contentment. And then I'm pushed back in the bubble again, and the darkness comes into the bubble, and it has 10,000 forms. It's changing in its form and colors and shapes and sizes in front of me with a speed that is 10,000 forms in 3 seconds. And there's a sort of barrier between me and it. And it's communicating to me again, non-linguistically, telepathically, directly. And it says to me, you work for me. Your deal is you work for me in this lifetime. And I was like, oh yeah, I do. That's true. That's absolutely true. And then this angelic being drops me back down inside my body again, down the same tunnel. And so I'm in my body in the tree, and I was very excited because I just met God. And so I jumped out of the tree and I ran and I went in the house, and I got in trouble because I was told to stay outside. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And I had consequences for coming in, and the consequences was, and I told my mom I was going to be, I'm going to be a priest, Mom, because in the run between the tree and the house, I was raised Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox. It was a mixed marriage thing in those days. That's what they called it. And the only reference point I had for someone who worked for God was a priest. And so I ran in the house and I told my mom, I'm going to be a priest. I talked to God, and God's angel came in and told me I work for him, and because of patriarchal language and all that, and back then. And so my mother scolded me for coming in the house and said, if you're going to be a priest, no one's going to, because she was ironing my dad's shirts, and no one's going to do your ironing for you or your dusting. You're gonna dust the dining room right now as punishment, and you're going to do it quietly and not wake your brother, and then you're going to stay outside. And so I had this experience, and I learned from that experience to keep my mouth shut about them. Because when I came back, I still knew myself. I still knew of my higher self. I was still a little kid with a little kid brain, and it by far didn't make me a perfect kid. I wasn't like Mr. Holy Angel kid sitting with my halo above my head. I was not that kid. But I knew from that point on, I knew that I loved my dog and my mom and my brother and my sisters and my dad a whole lot more that day than I had before, even having gotten in trouble.
That's a pretty amazing experience to have at 5 years old. I have a question that just hit me. So there's a question a lot about, why does a small portion of people who die and are resuscitated remember? Now, I'm wondering, with all your experiences, and this is tying a little bit into another interview I did with someone who is an out-of-body expert, and he said as people start doing exercises about this, they start having memories of years ago when they had out-of-body experiences during dreams and didn't remember them, but their brain neurons are shifting where they're then able to download. I mean, I'm guessing this how it works. I'm not saying this is a fact, but we have a non-local consciousness, and all memories are stored into that, and a portion probably download and are processed by our brains. And as people start doing meditation exercises and learning OBEs, out-of-body experiences, maybe, as they start having memories of maybe one they had 10 years ago during a dream that wasn't at all part of their consciousness. Do you think there's some way your brain chemistry or neural network had developed a certain way where you were able to download your near-death experience into your day-to-day Peter life, and maybe some people who have near-death experiences, their brains just can't download them? Is that something that would make sense to you?
That is the conclusion that I reached a long time ago.
No way.
Yeah, because plus, I had this, how do I remember anything about my NDE? Because I know I had no brain when I was there. How do I remember a single thing about it? Yet it totally changed my life. And so throughout the years, I've done a lot of reading, and the closest there's this guy named Andrew Newberg, who's a neurotheologian. He's a neurologist studying the interface between spiritual experience and neurons. He informed my thinking, and others did as well. But even before I heard about him, I figured there must be some sort of tubules in my head, or some sort of a little tiny antenna that I got genetically, that I didn't. I was 5 years old. I didn't make this thing happen. This thing happened to me, and maybe it's, I've got hazel eyes, and my pinky is a little crooked. So maybe I got this brain thing that came along with my DNA somewhere along the way that allowed me to have this sensitivity to it. But also, it's not just my body; it's this soul thing going on too. There's this interface between these two. But I do think that it's likely, or at least possible, and put it this way, it's possible that not everybody remembers their near-death experience because they're not wired to. It's like, so here's this crazy thing. There's a certain and I just read about this in this book that I just finished. There's a certain percentage of women who have extra cones in their eyes. I think they're cones or rods. They see color. They see colors men don't see. They just do. And they like have a million more of these or some outrageous number. It's just a small percentage of women, but it's real. I mean, and they see colors other people can't see. They can differentiate between colors that nobody else can do. And that's just the way it is. And I think that that's probably what it is for people like me, that I came in with this genetic capacity for these experiences that kind of matched my soul life. That's the way I think of it anyway.
So now you had said after your first NDE, you were transformed and it affected you as Peter in a daily way. In what ways were you transformed?
Oh, the realer than real thing was the biggest of them all, because this entire reality in which I was now exiled had this, I'd like to say, these are I'd like to say a celluloid black and white thinness that was fragile, flickering, and broken. But through all of that, there was pouring this light that I could see. I could see it. I could feel it. It was as if all of my senses became one sense. I have eyeballs and I can hear and I touch with my fingers. But there's this other part of me that is all of those senses are one sense that senses the light inside all things that exist, and more so in nature and in living creatures, plants included, but not exclusive to those things. And that this light is pouring through everything all the time. And so my immediate experience was one of disassociation from this world. And so I have this continual, what might be called a depersonalization or a non-attachment to this place. And it's a constant theme through my life. But it also comes with love and radiant love and divine presence. And it made me immediately not religious. All of my religion went away because all of my belief systems vanished. My belief in anything that humans have constructed with their language and conceptualizations became, other than things that could be made into physicality, all the ideas of politics and finance and national relationships, all that stuff, it's all made up. We make the whole thing up. And so I had all of my belief systems were eliminated. I found that the only place that I had any solace or relief was inside of myself. I've been practicing centering prayer meditation since high school, and I found that place of silence to be the only place where I felt like me. I almost immediately left on a theater tour. So I was in this theater troupe, a university-based thing, and we did 24,000 miles, 64 shows over many months. And I self-isolated from everybody. I not only didn't ride in the van with anybody else, I sat in the back of the pickup truck by myself, dressed for the weather, meditating and just being alone and trying to figure out what had happened to me. There's every day of my experience since this thing first happened, my location and time and space is recognizably to me not permanent. The whole thing is always shifty to me. Lots of things.
And were you further changed by your second NDE?
Yes. I mean, after my first NDE, I changed the course of my entire life. I didn't go to graduate school in architecture to join the family firm, which I'd been working toward my entire life. I went to divinity school to study mysticism. And then after my second NDE, I've been working in television. I had this TV show up here in Maine on a couple NBC stations, 2 minutes every morning before the weather to tell an inspirational story. It was a nonprofit sistered in with a corporation. I was in the hospital when my book came out. So my book was coming out in a month, but my publisher contacted me in my bed saying that the Amazon was releasing it a month early. And the TV station called me while I was in my freaking bed and said that a new corporation had purchased 40 stations, including theirs, and they were going to phase out my show. And so all this thing is going on. And I had reached this place in my life. I had always held back on my NDE. I kept it a secret for 20 years. I came out at one point in the early 2000s, and then I came out in a small way. And then this book's coming out. It's going to make maybe a big splash, which is going to change my life. I could lose all of my credibility. And I as a professional person, I decided that I had nothing else to lose anymore. I could finally actually start talking about it directly. I spent much of my career as a minister in a Congregational United Church of Christ denomination, liberal, progressive, social justice oriented kind of place. But I wasn't a believer, not since the day I died. And so when I worked in television, I didn't have to be biblically based in TV. So I played around with talking about NDE while not talking about it, like indirectly. But after this happened, the first thing out of my mouth in the hospital room to all these people was I just died. And then I decided, all right, now that I've had this transformation again, where I know that I have this one last chance to be the messenger that I was instructed to be, that I had agreed to be when before I was born in the first place, that now is the time to go all in. So I've been living through my near-death experience all of my life, all of my ministry in the church, everything I've ever written. It's always through this lens, and so that made me an unusual kind of clergy person, quite eccentric, and very universally based in my approach to helping people, not exclusive whatsoever. And so after my second NDE, I decided to finally start really talking about it. And my book was in December. I was in New York. And this is because my publicist got this for me. I was on Fox and Friends I know it's unusual, but that's what, no,
I'm not a fan, as anyone who follows me knows. I'm pretty liberal. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And but that was the show that my publicist got, so that's the one I went to. And it launched the book, and it hit number 76 on Amazon that day. And
Amazing. And I'm just going to add one quick thing about Fox and Friends. I think it's great to go on, though. I think, I'm not good. People sometimes just have the values they have because of what they've been exposed to. So they're not necessarily bad people.
well, that's what I figured. Right. So I went on, and that launched this book, and now suddenly I'm out in the open, and I decided that I was going to start my own channel and start and do my own thing, and I left the denomination. Actually, I'd left it before when I was on television. I didn't participate at all, but I officially left it on their point of view. So it's these things, much to the struggle of my family, and they love me and tolerate my eccentricities, but it's not been easy for them now, especially now that I'm fully out there. They just accept it.
I mean, that's good. They accept it. You're just bringing nothing but love and kindness and hope to maybe, I know you said you're more out of religion, but, there's people like me as an atheist, cultural Jew, but atheist who had no hope when my dad got sick. And so there's, all of us non-religious people have a right to have hope in our grief too. So thank you, as someone who was not part of any religion or never believed in God.
You're welcome.
You said you saw yourself, your real self, on the other side. And all of us have characteristics that we define as our personality. Like, you probably have parts of Peter that if you're like, hey, tell us a little about yourself, there are parts of yourself that feel very Peter. To what extent were those qualities part of your other side you?
None. Zero. Zippo. Nothing.
None. Oh no.
Not at all. Nothing to do with me. and I know that that's a tough thing for people to hear who are grieving. There are other near-death experiencers who went to different levels than I did, different heavens, you could say. But where I was, I was more in union with light than that my humanity was completely gone. That I had never been any of those other incarnations that I had lived as. What I was this love, and this love is communicative to all of the love that I had ever experienced in my life. All of the love, all of the people who loved me, and my dogs too. Everybody who had ever loved me came with me, not as a person, but as in the form of their purity, in the form of their love. And it was that love that helped open my eyes in order to accept the divine love. I've spent a lot of my career as a congregational minister in and around the dying and the grieving, and I became known in the towns that I lived in as and this is a weird thing. Okay, I was the go-to guy for everybody at death, and I didn't discriminate. Oh, if you're not a church member, I can't. It didn't matter to me, and so I was in lots of people's houses, atheists included, or attending atheist deaths, which happened as well, and I'll tell you that quite a number of times I had shared death experiences where I watched the deceased come to collect the dying, and would witness. And it wasn't just like at the moment of death, which happened at that point too, but there'd be days ahead of time where they'd be talking to the loved one who died, and that person's, there's nobody in the room, dear. You're just having a hallucination, is what they used to say, but that's not what was going on. There was a person there coming to collect them that were making the transition. I have had myself experienced my dad coming back to me after death, and just about a year ago, and he came, and I've had after death communications with dead people, and so I know that there's more to it than I understand, and that the great relief that people feel, and the number is around 60% of grieving people experience after death communication. In a study that Dr. Marjorie Willicott, presented at the IANDS conference 2 years ago, 60% of these people of the grieving experience an after death communication. And the reality of that experience, the reality with a capital R of that experience, changes their grief trajectory. And that is a measurable thing. I know that there are other NDEers who are have soul groups, and they go to these different corporeal heavens, and they meet people and they hang out with them. And that's just not my experience. And so I can't really say what I don't know. But I do know this, is that all of the love that was given to me in my life, I carried with me. And there was no love that I was lacking. And there was nothing that I lacked. I lacked nothing and no one.
Now I'm going to ask a question that I know can be a little hard for listeners, and I had a hard time with this in the beginning, learning this too. You were given a choice to come back twice, and you came back both times.
Yeah.
A lot of us, like myself included, my loved one did not come back. And what should we make of that? Did they not want to come back for us, or is not everyone given a choice?
I think not everyone's given a choice. I don't know why I had a choice twice, but I did. I know that ultimately nobody gets a choice. Nobody gets out of here alive. Everybody dies. Everybody goes. And that most near-death experiencers I know personally didn't want to come back. They wanted to stay there because of it's not only realer than real, it's your best. It's the best. Here's my analogy. It's it's all of the best orgasms for the whole history of all hominids put into one tiny moment. It is all of that in one beautiful space that is incomprehensible. And so it's like that first time that you had an Oreo cookie, and you can never get that thing back again. It's so outrageously, inconceivably, overwhelmingly gorgeous and blissful that the only reason why I chose to come back is because I knew that I was going to go back to that. It's like, oh yeah, I'll get on the train and I'll go to a decaying and dying industrial city and go hang out there for a while. Can I come back home again? Yeah, you can come back. Here's your ticket. And so I know that I'm going to get back on the train again. I know I'm going to go back home again. Those who are left behind in this life suffer a great deal more than those who die. And that the solace of an after-death communication, should you have one, is enough to make life endurable again. And if you don't have one, hearing stories about others who do can give you hope too. Because this thing, when you get an after-death communication, it gives hope, but it's more than hope like, I hope Santa Claus brings me the gift that I've always asked for. It's not that kind of hope. It's a hope that is knowledge hope. It's noetic hope. It's wisdom, intuitive hope that's based in a direct experience of the eternal nature of those who precede us into death.
So I know a lot of skeptical people, at times myself included, which I worry about sometimes. And there have been studies coming out, studies on both ends, but some studies say that this is just the process of a dying brain to help alleviate terrors during death. Why do you not think that's what it was?
Well, first I'll say, if that's what it is, then the hope that I bring still relieves emotional suffering in the time between that moment and their death. If that's the worst thing that happens, or the best, that's good enough. But as for me, I'm all for the scientific exploration of all things neurological. I want to understand the functionality. I want to understand how it works. I read a lot of science. I read science news every day, and as I read through my scroll, I get a lot of science news, and I like it. But I can't prove what happened to me. Nobody can. It's all subjective. The only evidence I have, and maybe it drove me insane, and so maybe it caused me an insanity, a god madness. So I lived the life the way I do, but I've lived my life pretty fearlessly, and with a great amount of above average compassionate action that often put myself in harm's way. And the only evidence I have for it is the way that I've lived, and I've definitely not been perfect. Okay, don't get me wrong. I have hurt people, because everybody hurts everybody, and people I love. That's just the way being a human is. But my life, the trajectory of my life, so radically changed away from where I was headed when this all began, and the way that I have continuously been inserted into circumstances that were dangerous to me, but healing for others, including entire communities. I guess it just shows that my courage comes from somewhere. My fortitude, my single-mindedness about this. I've been on the single-minded track since the day this thing happened the first time. And if it's proven by science, which I love, but also science is always changing when new information comes. If it's proven by science that I'm insane, then I've done a lot of damn good with my insanity. I don't need to know whether I don't need to know whether people believed me or not. I was afraid I had some fear, and my fear was my loss of credibility in order to to earn a career, to earn a living. And my relationships were at risk with this. But I don't have it. I don't care if anybody actually believes me, because it doesn't matter to me, because I know where I'm from and I know where I'm going.
But you think we can feel confident, you really stand by that this was genuine and we do not need to fear death,
Oh yeah.
and that we should really feel safe trusting it's not hallucinations, that our loved ones are around us.
No. And I'll give you a little story. So one day I was out in this little sailboat, a 19-foot sailboat, and I live in the Gulf of Maine, and there's a bunch of islands around us. And on the inside of the islands, the wind wasn't blowing very hard at all. And this is an old boat, like a 1972 sailboat, so it's a little tired. And so I sailed out around the edge of this island, and I'm solo sailing, and there's nobody else out there. And suddenly the wind is 10 knots more. I have too much sail up, and the seas are bigger, and they're starting to come over the gunwale. And I had this like a visceral, emotional body like rush of adrenaline. Oh my God, I'm in trouble. This weak little boat could go down. And I had this moment of, oh, I got to pay attention. And I had this tension. And then I thought to myself, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? I could die. And I was like, oh, right. I remember now. The worst thing that had happened to me is I could die. And it brought me this immediate calm. Even though the boat situation hadn't changed, I became relaxed. And then I did what I had to do in the boat and got out of that big wind, and all was well. And that is definitely the way that my life has been. I don't know a single near-death experiencer, and there's 10 to 20 million of us in the United States. I don't know a single one who's afraid of dying. Nobody. Maybe, well, let me rephrase that. Maybe they don't want to die a long and painful death, but nobody's afraid of going.
That feels really good to hear. And so that sounds like it's the best aspect of having had an NDE, or two NDEs, I should say. And are there downsides?
Oh, yeah. Yes, there are. And for much of my life, I was closeted and angry because I had chosen to come back and was allowed to come back, and I didn't realize what I was getting into this world of. I think of it as a beautiful hellscape, full of pain and suffering, but really good things too. But the suffering is pretty immense. And as I was pretty angry for a long time, it felt like a curse to me. I couldn't talk about it because I didn't have any words to talk about it. And even if I could talk about it, people were going to respond like I was nutso. And so it was very isolating. I lived very isolated. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell my wife what was going on inside of me. I didn't tell anybody anything, because even though she knew I had died, how could I explain to her the things that I was seeing and the visions that I was having, and I couldn't do that, so I didn't. So it was socially isolating, and not only that, and not only was it that, so because of this interior thing, everything people did thought was, I was like, why are they doing this? Why? It would be like, why? It was like I was not a human being. Why are these people interested in doing this weird thing? Why are they? I don't know. War. Why are they going to war? This is crazy. Why does that person behave that way? Why are they greedy? Why do they have all that power? What's going on there? And I always felt like I don't understand, and I didn't understand belief anymore. Belief was like a thing that was erased from me. I don't have any beliefs. I mean, I believe that the sun is gonna. I believe in the rights of individuals to live their lives. I believe in those sorts of things, but I don't have any religious beliefs.
And if you had the choice to have experienced the NDEs or not, you could go back and choose. Was it worth it?
Yes, I would say that now, yes. But if you had asked me that question 30 years ago, I would have said no. Maybe even 10 years ago, I might have said, meh, maybe. I might have given it a maybe. I would have hedged it a little bit, only because I couldn't be truthful. I had to live masked. And when you live masked, and I was in the church, okay, so I was in the church that does not believe in reincarnation, that deified Jesus and made him the superpower, which I didn't believe either. And so I was working, doing good work, but I was basically living a lie every day.
It sounds lonely.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned one of the after effects of your NDEs of seeing everyone's hearts and connection. Are there any other interesting after effects that you have?
Oh yeah, there's tons of them. Every day is a joyride. I have an interference. I interfere with electromagnetic radiation, which is something that's pretty common. In particular, there's a radio frequency 90.1 because that's my local NPR station that I block that wave. Sometimes when I'm sitting here in my studio, these lamps that are up here for my podcasty stuff, I'll get really emotional, and they'll just go up to 100, and I think they're at 15 or something in their setting, and they just go. That happens on camera sometimes. It's kind of weird. I got struck by lightning. I was a mile away from the storm in my convertible, my dad's convertible, and the bolt out of the blue was out of the black, but it came across the blue, hit me in the shoulder and my thigh. This might have been a year after, and I was like nowhere near the freaking storm. I was at least a mile away. It didn't hurt me. It just like a bomb going off in my car. So yeah, I have that electromagnetic thing going on. Can't wear watches. Watches never, they don't work for me. What else can I tell you about that? Oh, when I was in TV, we used a lot of remote mics. And I would wear a remote mic in the studio, or at least they would try to wire me with the remote mic. It wouldn't work. I ended up on the hard wire because there was so much interference that they would use the mic, it'd work. I would use the mic, it wouldn't work. That kind of thing.
I use Zencaster to record my podcast. Never have had a problem ever till I started interviewing NDEers. And everyone I've met ever since the IANDS, I actually apologize. I forgot to send you the warning, but I had to send the warning because twice it absolutely didn't work. It just wouldn't even load, and we had to come up with an alternative plan, and then it worked. And then another time I was interviewing another NDE or Angela, and it seemed like I was like, this is working perfectly. Suddenly in the middle, just everything blew out. We had to restart it. I was like, oh my God. So I've never, suddenly most of the time I've had weird electronic experiences interviewing experiencers. In the beginning, before we started recording, we got a little bit into time, and you had an interesting take, which makes sense to me, but as much as time can make sense. So I'm not going to actually say it made sense, but you said time doesn't exist and it does. Can you go a little further?
Sure. So on the other side, there was timelessness. It was all time at once. Timelessness wasn't the absence of time, although it also includes the absence of time. It was also all time at the same time. So there was a nowness to it. But here in this world, do you ever see that map? It's like a graphic, and it's a grid graphic of the universe. And in the middle of this grid, like a pool table, is a star, and the star sits down on this grid graphic, and it bends the space and the time around it. And I think it's the movie Interstellar gets into the locality of time and the bending of time through gravity. And we can one of the ways that the telescopes work is that there's this thing called lensing. And so a telescope can see behind another galaxy because of the gravitational pull on time and space by the gravity of that galaxy. And so that it allows the light that's coming from behind that galaxy to actually bend around it and come out the other side. And and everybody who I know who's an elderly person, one of the things that happened as a clergy person is I hung around with a lot of the elderly, 90s and 80s and 70s. Now I'm creeping up that way myself because of time. But time speeds up for them. The older you get, the faster time goes. You probably noticed that yourself. It feels like it.
Yeah, no, I definitely. I feel like as soon as college started going a little faster, and then I was happier there than the other schools but then when I graduated, it was just like insane, and it gets faster every year. Yeah.
It gets faster all the time. But time itself doesn't change, and it's our experience of it that changes. But also, the universe is made up of these very heavy objects that bend time and space. And time and space continuum is the reason why physicists talk about it in one. They call it the time-space continuum because it's time and space are woven together. So time's real. People say time's not real. Well, time is real. The planet loops around the sun, and it's on its axis, and the days, the sun comes up, the sun goes down from our point of view. But there's this thing called now, and the now is timeless, and that now can be found inside yourself in silence. When we shut off our monkey mind and quiet down to the place of our breath, we can experience that moment of emptiness, and that is connected to eternity. And that timelessness is also part of ourselves. So, it's both. Time is real in this universe, but timelessness and where I went when I died.
And do you think there's other material dimensions? I know string theory talks a bit about dimensions. Are there other material dimensions where we're experiencing something maybe more like being a human than a non-material dimension, but it abides by different laws of time?
I think that science thinks that that's true. And although we haven't been able to prove that yet, we do have superpositioning and quantum entanglement to show us demonstrably that there are dimensions that we cannot understand but actually do exist. I think it's the Tibetan Buddhists who have Shambhala, this other world. There are shamanic traditions that talk about walking in other worlds. When I leave my body in my dreams, I sometimes end up in places where I am in some other kind of world. I think that the pursuit of those things are good. I think that the pursuit of no thing is better. Rather than trying to travel between the worlds and the dimensions, I'd rather go back to my origin and go home again, to the oneness itself.
Well, that's encouraging because we are all doing that, even though most of us feel here we don't want to do that and resist it as much as possible and hate that our loved ones are there. But, I'm not going to say that horrible, horrible line, be happy they're in a better place. No, I'm not going to pretend I'm above it. I'd rather my dad was in a shittier place and was with me, even if he had wanted to stay. I still even if he was mad about it, I would prefer he came back and had not stayed on the other side. I'm not that spiritually advanced to be that selfless. However, since we don't have a choice, that our loved ones have passed, it's encouraging to know that they are not suffering.
They're not suffering. And I don't want you to think that I don't grieve. When I found out that my sister, in this space, I was actually pretty much where I'm sitting right now, when I got the phone call that my sister, my long lost sister, might have been murdered. She turned out not to have been murdered, but that was the report we first got. I collapsed to the floor, and my knees went out. And it wasn't like, oh, I think I'll collapse to the floor. My knees went out from underneath me, and I landed on the floor. So most of all of the NDEers that I've ever spoken to about grief, we all grieve. We all miss the people that we love and would rather have them with us. But it also comes with this knowledge that I'm out of here too, and that this temporary place, it's a passing through place. I'm a passerby, and so were they.
And make the most while we're here.
Yeah. Yeah.
enjoy what we can, learn what we can. You just mentioned, this could be one last question before I ask you a few questions about UFOs, if you're still okay to stay on a little longer. You mentioned that you visited this other dimension and it felt real to you, not like a dream, I'm going to assume. What was it like? How would you describe it?
I was taken by the angel back up the silver cord. This is the year before I died. I was backpacking on the Appalachian Trail in Massachusetts in March, the year before I died the first time. So this was March of 79, I think. 80? Might have been March of 80. I think I died in 81. Is that right? I have to get my dates straight. Anyway, so it was the year before. And I was backpacking on the Appalachian Trail, and I was taken from my body and brought up to this other dimension, this void. I described it a little bit before. There was this darkness, and I was inside the angelic being, and there was in an infinite darkness, and I was safe, but it was more original. It was more original than here, more, I don't want to say dense than here, because that makes it feel corporeal. It was more, there was more life there by an infinite stretch, even though it was darkness. There was just more life, paradoxically. And I didn't travel to a place where I had legs and walked around on the surface of another planet and met the locals kind of thing. I was in another dimension where, well, it was a higher, more real place than it is here, where I'm from and where I'm going. When I have that kind of dream, I'm not in charge at all. I'm awake and aware and carried and cared for.
Okay, so UFOs. Tell us your UFO story.
So yeah, crazy. 1977, I was a camp counselor in Ohio. It was a Catholic camp, and I got a job. And so I was a camp counselor, and because I was in charge of the rifle range, because I had my merit badge, Boy Scout merit badge, and so I was a trusted camp counselor because you don't trust, I had kids with guns. And so because I was a trusted camp counselor, the head of the camp allowed me to take the camp car one night with a bunch of the guys to go roller skating. And so we did at this rink. And so the next week we decided to say the same thing, only we went out and bought a bunch of beer, 3.2 beer, and I had some weed with me. And so we drove up to the top of this hilltop overlooking the Maumee River in this park. And Ohio is like flat as a pancake in this area. And it's all cornfields and soy fields. And so, but we're on this hillock overlooking this river. This is this park. And it's a curvy road up there, and we park, and we're like, I put on the cassette. I had a cassette deck. And I had to put a cassette in, a rock and roll cassette, and I pressed the button, and the guy in the back seat, he pops open a beer. I go, and I grab the bowl, and I'm about to light it up with a Bic lighter, and suddenly the entire parking lot was illuminated like it was daytime. Boom. And now we can see each other. I'm like, get the thing, holding it up to my face, and I can see everything around me. And it's like, okay, boys, it's the cops. We're busted, and we had all gone to Catholic school. So all of us, we'd all gone through private Catholic schools, all of us. So we knew what the rules were, and so I was like, okay, we have to give ourselves up. We just have to get out of the car and give ourselves up. And so that's what we did. We all got out of the car, and we turn around, we face back of the car, and there is no cop car there. But the whole place is like illuminated like daylight. And so we all look up, and over our head was a white, big, huge white light, 100 feet across, 200 feet. I don't know. Huge. It was just twice the height of the treetop. And when I looked up, and it was like a solid wall of white. I then looked off toward the camp to see if I could see the edge of this thing. And it was way down, like at a deep angle that I could finally see stars. And it's totally silent. We could still hear the river, but all the crickets had stopped cricking. And we're just standing there like, what is this thing? We're jumping up and down. Look at this thing. And we're all excited. We're all like 18 and 17. And so it starts to drift off like a balloon, just starts to drift away. And it starts to go down the sort of paralleling the treetop. And I'm like, get back in the car, get back in the car. So I get back in the car and I'm going as fast as I can down this curvy road to the state highway that actually ran right between the camp, the one side of the camp and the other side of the camp, because it was a school campus, small state highway. And as we rounded the corner onto the state highway, I asked everybody, throw out all the beer, throw out all the weed. Everything gets thrown out the window. So we have nothing in the car anymore. And we hadn't even taken anything. No, we were totally sober. And so I floor it, and this thing is now ahead of me, I don't know how far, a quarter mile, and it's flying over the treetops, over the cornfields, over the soy fields, and I'm following and paralleling this thing, and we're all hanging out the car. I'm driving with my head out the window, and we're all looking at it and shouting. And we blew through right through the middle of camp, and I thought, oh my God, we're going to get caught. But it was like 11 o'clock, and I think we were doing like 85, 86 miles an hour. And we went a couple of miles past the camp, and when we get to this intersection where there was a bridge that went to the town that was across the river, and we were doing about 90, and we had caught up with it a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. And when it got to this right angle turn, it made a right angle move. It went from I should say, when it was with us over our heads, it not only made no noise, there were no jet engines. There was no visible means of propulsion, as they say. So it reached this intersection, and it made a right angle turn and never decelerated. It was going 90 here and 90 there. And there was no arc to it. It was just this like that. And we went like scooting by it, hit the brakes, slammed the wheel to the left, went down to this poor farmer's field, wiped out a bunch of his corn that was like knee high, spun the car with it floored, thinking we were going to get stuck in this guy's field. But I had it pinned right to the ground, right to the floorboards, and swung the car around and aimed for that road, came up over the embankment onto the road again, boom. And it was waiting for us like a half mile up the road, over the treetops. And I kept it floored, and we're all hanging out the window. And as we got fairly close to it, maybe a quarter mile away, maybe less than that, I don't really remember, but it shot off. It is perfectly still, and it shot off into space, out of the atmosphere so fast it left what looked like a solid streak of light, like a column of light, and then the light faded. Like we could see this light, and what the? And so we stopped the car, and we're all excited. And this corn stalk sticking out of the undercarriage of the car. We had to get under the car and pull them all out. And then last May, a year ago, this past May, I was sitting in my backyard. We have a fire pit back here. I live in the coast of Maine, and we have a fire pit out here, and it's very dark out here at night. The moon was a 3/4 moon above some very fast moving thin clouds. And there was an oak tree that hadn't leafed out yet. And I was with my buddy, and he said to me, I want to take a picture, take a pose. And so I slumped back on my chair, and over my head was this big, huge ball. I don't know how far up it was, but it was below the fast moving clouds. There was an east wind that was coming. I don't know, the clouds were probably doing 40 knots up above, and it was going at an angle to them, and had no visible means of propulsion. It was a perfect sphere, and it was moving incredibly slowly, very slowly, right over us. And my buddy, he pulled out his camera and took a very shaky iPhone video of it, and it just disappeared over the horizon. So those are my two UFO stories.
Did it show up in the phone, the second one?
Oh yeah, we have a little video. I made a little video out of it. It's on my channel. I think I called it like UFOs will scare Christians the most, or something like that.
I'll link to it. And it's too bad with the first time. iPhones obviously weren't invented yet. Too. That would have been amazing to see too.
We didn't have a camera, I was like, no, none of that.
Do you think there were beings, I guess the word people tend to use are aliens, in the UFO, or do you think it was more like the robots we've sent to Mars, or the, space, forgetting the word, some of the space machines we have?
Like a probe.
Probe, yes.
So I don't know, but when we were teenage boys, we were all saying to each other, "They must be a bunch of teenage boys because they're letting us catch up to them, and they're just playing with us, and they're all this kind of stuff." So we thought that there were beings inside it.
So I'm asking you this specifically because you are so into science. From your understanding of science, how do you explain an afterlife? How do you think it works? The best way you could try to put it together.
I think afterlife is the first life, and this one is the second. It's not so much an afterlife as so much of it is the real life. And the body is it feels to me like it's a biological robot in which my software, like I have an app inside of the software, and pardon me, I have an app inside of this hardware, but most of me is in the cloud. I'm up on the web somewhere, and that when we die, it's not so much that my soul inhabits my body, although I have that experience as well as my body inhabits my soul, and that when my body dies, I shed that layer and become who I've always been.
Thank you so much. And thanks for being so open about your wisdom, your experiences. It really was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Can you tell our listeners again the name of your book and where everyone can find you?
I have a couple books, 2 Minutes for God, which is a collection of brief stories from my TV days. It was a main bestseller. And I have Heaven is Beautiful, which is an Audible International Best-Seller, and it's been optioned for a film that I'm actually working on again this week. Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. And I'm at peterpanagore.love, and I specialize in helping people integrate after spiritual experiences and mystical experiences and near-death experiences. If you need someone to talk to, I'm your guy.
To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, a sciencey-skeptic explores grief, healing, and evidence of an afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?